Have you ever noticed how life's biggest moments rarely announce themselves loudly? They slip quietly through the door, sit beside you, and gently change everything you know. My name is Rachel Bennett, and not so long ago, one phone call changed my life forever. It was an ordinary Thursday evening. Dinner was simmering gently on the stove, my daughter Emma coloring quietly at the table, and the fading sunlight painted our kitchen with warm hues of gold. My husband Michael was on his way home, and I expected him to walk through the door at any moment, smiling that same easy smile he'd worn since college. But instead, my phone buzzed a stranger's voice on the other end, carefully choosing each word as if afraid to break them. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm so sorry. There's been an accident." In that instant, the world went silent. Grief doesn't always roar loudly. Sometimes it whispers soft and steady, unraveling everything familiar. But what happened next taught me something powerful. It taught me about family, the kind we're born into and the kind we choose. It showed me how strength hides quietly inside us, waiting patiently for the moment we need it most. Today, I want to share this journey with you, not just a story about loss, but about finding hope, discovering resilience, and embracing the quiet courage that exists within us all. Wherever you're watching from, whatever battles you might be silently fighting, know this: you're not alone, and healing, though gentle and slow, is always possible. It started out like any other Thursday. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the window, casting soft golden patterns across the kitchen walls. Emma, my sweet 9-year-old, sat at our old wooden table, crayons scattered around her, completely absorbed in drawing a rainbow with her tongue sticking out slightly, something she got from her father. The gentle bubbling of pasta sauce simmering on the stove filled the kitchen with a comforting, familiar aroma. Life was quiet, simple, beautiful in its ordinariness. Michael, my husband, usually came home around this time. I always waited to hear the familiar hum of his old Honda pulling into our driveway, his keys jangling cheerfully as he walked in, his voice warm as he'd call out, "Honey, I'm home." But instead of Michael, my phone vibrated on the countertop. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. I hesitated briefly, then answered it, my heart already sensing something was wrong. "Mrs. Bennett." The voice was gentle but cautious, a careful tone I later learned to recognize as one doctors often use when delivering devastating news. "I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. Your husband Michael was brought in about half an hour ago. I'm so sorry to inform you, but he passed away. It was his heart, a sudden cardiac event. There was nothing we could do." At that moment, my reality fractured. The room blurred around me, colors and shapes dissolving like paint running down a canvas. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping the edge of the countertop to steady myself. Grief has a peculiar way of hitting swift, silent, ruthless. It didn't matter that I'd just spoken to Michael a few hours earlier, laughing over some silly joke he'd heard in the teacher's lounge. Suddenly, the voice that filled my mornings with warmth and my nights with comfort was gone forever. Emma must have sensed the shift in the air. She stopped coloring quietly, slipping from her chair to stand beside me. Her tiny hand found mine squeezing gently as she asked softly, "Mommy, are you okay?" I pulled her into my arms, holding tightly, desperately wishing I could shield her from what was about to come. I knew I needed help, someone to steady me through the storm. Instinctively, I reached for my phone again and dialed my mother's number. My hands trembled slightly as the call connected. "Mom," I said, my voice barely audible, choked with tears. "It's Michael. He's gone. I need you here. Please, can you come over now? There was a brief pause, a hesitation I didn't fully understand until I heard the faint clinking of glasses and laughter in the background. "Oh, honey," my mom replied gently but dismissively. "We're at Jessica's birthday dinner right now. Everyone's here and we just brought out the cake. Can it wait until tomorrow? Maybe try to get some sleep. We'll check on you soon." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone in disbelief, unable to process the coldness of her reaction. My heart ached, not just from losing Michael, but from the harsh reality of realizing that in one of life's darkest moments, I was truly alone. In hindsight, I understand that grief can make people uncomfortable. My mother had always struggled with emotional depth, preferring cheerful gatherings and bright facades over messy truths. But in that instant, her words felt like a betrayal, a brutal reminder of how easily some families dismiss genuine pain in favor of convenience. I had grown up accustomed to her subtle neglect, but somehow I'd still hoped, perhaps naively, that in this moment of profound loss, she'd finally step forward, mothering me in the way I desperately needed. Over the next several hours, I navigated the impossible tasks alone, calling Michael's siblings, breaking the devastating news to his elderly parents, trying to explain gently to Emma that her daddy wouldn't be coming home. It was in these hours that I learned a powerful lesson. Tragedy doesn't just expose our vulnerabilities, it shines an unflinching light on the truth of our relationships. Sometimes the people we count on the most simply aren't capable of giving us the comfort we crave. Accepting that fact is painful yet strangely liberating. I thought of a friend from my book club, Carla, who had lost her husband unexpectedly just 2 years earlier. At the time, I had offered condolences and support, but I didn't truly understand her grief until this very moment. The depth of her pain, her loneliness now felt achingly familiar. It was then I realized how limited words were compared to genuine presence. Carla had told me once gently but pointedly, "You never really know who your family is until life breaks you." Now, as I sat alone absorbing her words, they resonated deeply. Emma had drifted off to sleep beside me on the sofa, her small body curled into mine, her breathing steady. I brushed the hair from her forehead, promising her silently that we'd get through this somehow. Even as my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, a new resolve was quietly forming. I'd find strength not just for myself, but for the precious child Michael had left behind. In the days that followed, I discovered grief doesn't work in predictable ways. It ebbs and flows, catching you off guard at mundane moments, a coffee cup left unwashed, a familiar shirt still hanging in the closet. I stumbled through arrangements and paperwork decisions I'd never imagined making alone. But through every agonizing step, Emma's quiet presence became my anchor, reminding me of the simple yet profound lesson I'd learned the night Michael passed the bonds. We build through love, and presence matter far more than shared DNA. This truth became clearer as I saw who showed up and who didn't. My mother never came that night nor the next day. It wasn't until much later, after all the important decisions had been made without her, that she finally appeared at our doorstep, bringing with her not comfort but a question, one that would redefine my understanding of family loyalty and inheritance forever. But before we get to that moment, let's pause. Because this story isn't just about loss or betrayal. It's also about recognizing the quiet strength within ourselves, the kind we rarely know we have, until circumstances force it forward. It's about finding family in unexpected places and choosing who we allow into our lives during the hardest chapters. Most importantly, it's about learning to trust our own hearts even when they've been broken beyond recognition. And so, as the days grew darker, a small flicker of determination took root inside me. Michael may have left this world unexpectedly, but the love he gave Emma and me, the memories we'd built, would become the foundation upon which we'd rebuild our lives. I didn't yet know how I'd do it, but I knew I would. Because sometimes amidst life's quiet tragedies, we discover our most powerful truths, and mine, as heartbreaking as it began, was just beginning to unfold. The day after Michael died, the world outside my window seemed unchanged. Birds still flitted among the branches, sunlight still danced across Emma's bedroom wall. But inside, everything felt hollow and sharp-edged, as if I'd been set adrift in a house suddenly too large, too quiet, too full of memories that stung. Even in the numbness, I found myself going through the motions, making breakfast for Emma, brushing her hair, folding laundry, tidying up the living room, as if straightening the cushions could somehow bring back the order I'd lost. While Emma watched cartoons, I sat at the kitchen table and replayed my conversation with my mother over and over. "We're at Jessica's birthday dinner. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Those words echoed in my chest, growing heavier with each repetition. I remembered so many childhood moments when Jessica was center stage and I was the afterthought. It wasn't always intentional, at least I wanted to believe that, but the pattern was unmistakable. My mother doted on Jessica, praised her piano recitals, made a fuss over every achievement, no matter how small. My own milestones were quieter affairs, good report cards hung on the fridge for a week, birthday cakes that were simple and store-bought. I'd grown up in the soft shadow of my sister's spotlight. Grief has a way of dredging up old wounds, of shining an unforgiving light on the cracks that have always been there. Sitting alone, I thought about how, even now, when I needed my family the most, I was still the one asked to wait, to be strong, to take care of things, until it was more convenient for them to pay attention. It's a silent bargain. So many of us make: don't rock the boat, don't demand too much, and maybe eventually you'll be seen. But in the aftermath of Michael's death, I began to wonder if that bargain was worth the emptiness it left behind. That morning, while I struggled to gather documents and make arrangements, Jessica posted a carousel of photos online from her birthday dinner. Balloons, laughter, candlelight, my mother grinning widely with her arm around Jessica's waist. Underneath, the comments poured in, "So beautiful, what a perfect night," not a single mention of Michael, or the loss that had just ripped through my world. It wasn't that they meant to be cruel, but grief, I was learning, often makes other people uncomfortable. It's easier to celebrate, to keep things light, to sidestep the messy, aching parts of life. A friend of mine, Lisa, once told me how her own mother skipped Lisa's graduation to take her brother to a sports tournament. She said, "I'd understand when I was older." Lisa recalled, her voice tight with the memory. I do understand. I understand that her priorities were always clear, and I just wasn't at the top of the list. In that moment, listening to Lisa, I felt an ache of recognition. Some families are built on unspoken hierarchies: favorite children, invisible children, and parents who never see the damage until it's too late. By midday, I'd called the funeral home, Michael's employer, our insurance agent. Each conversation left me feeling smaller, more depleted, as if grief were a tide determined to drag me under. I texted my mother again, asking gently if she could come sit with Emma for a few hours while I met with the funeral director. This time, her reply was short. "We have plans with Jessica's family this afternoon, but maybe tomorrow. Hope you're hanging in there." I stared at the screen, blinking back tears, a slow realization dawning that help might not be coming, not from the people I'd always assumed would stand by me when it mattered. There was a lesson taking shape, as sharp as it was sad. Sometimes the people you love are simply unable or unwilling to show up for you in the ways you need. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. I scrolled through messages of condolence from Michael's colleagues, from neighbors, even from parents of Emma's classmates. People who in many ways knew me less intimately than my own family, yet reached out with genuine kindness. I thought of Carla, my book club friend who'd once shared her own heartbreak over family neglect. Rachel, she'd said, sometimes you have to build your own support network. Blood isn't always thicker than water, not when the well runs dry. The next morning, I woke to a phone call, not from my mother or sister, but from Michael's older brother, Jim. His voice was shaky but determined. "We're coming over today, Rach. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." The relief I felt was almost overwhelming. When Jim and his wife arrived, they brought coffee bagels, and most importantly, a gentle presence. They helped with paperwork, distracted Emma with stories, made lists, and sat in silence when words felt too heavy. It was not the family I'd grown up with, but it was the family I had. It was in those small moments of solidarity that I realized how chosen family can sometimes offer the love and support our birth families struggle to provide. Sometimes comfort arrives in the form of a neighbor's casserole, a colleague's thoughtful note, or an in-law's steady hand on your shoulder. Michael's family and a handful of friends stepped quietly into the gaps my own family left behind, and I learned to accept their help without guilt or embarrassment. Looking back, I see now that my mother's absence wasn't about me not truly. It was about her discomfort, her inability to confront pain, her preference for celebration over sorrow. I don't excuse it, but I understand it a little more. There are so many parents who, faced with the hard truths of life, illness, death, disappointment, choose to distract themselves with the easy joys, the parties, the milestones that are easier to photograph and share. But there's a price for that choice, and it's often paid by the child who waits, who learns to handle grief and responsibility alone. I hope in sharing this that someone listening will feel seen, will recognize that they're not wrong for needing more than their family can give. The lesson isn't to stop hoping, but to look for kindness wherever it's offered and to accept support, even if it doesn't come from the people you expected. As the days passed and the practical work of grieving continued, I resolved to do things differently for Emma. I wanted her to know always that she was seen, valued, and loved, not just when it was easy, but especially when it was hard. That became my promise to her and to myself, to be present even in pain, and to build a new kind of family, one rooted in empathy, resilience, and the quiet strength we find in one another. But before I could begin that work, I still had to face the reality of what came next, the complicated business of settling Michael's affairs. That would require courage, clarity, and as I would soon learn, a willingness to protect Emma and myself, not just from the outside world, but sometimes from those closest to us. In the shadow of loss, new challenges were waiting, and I was about to discover just how fiercely I could fight for the family I still had. The day after I spoke with my mother, reality set in solid and immovable. Michael wasn't coming back, and suddenly, every decision was mine alone. That morning, I stared at our calendar on the kitchen wall, appointments and family dinners marked in Michael's handwriting. The only thing I could do was start crossing things out. I wanted to freeze time, but everything around me kept moving forward. Bills arrived, forms piled up. The world spun on. Loss doesn't pause for paperwork or practicalities. It demands that you keep going, even if your heart begs for everything to stop. I had never thought much about how complicated things could become after someone you love dies. There are so many things no one warns you about: the language of insurance, the weight of legal documents, the little indignities of being asked again and again to repeat the story of what happened. I remember sitting at the dining table. Paperwork spread everywhere, my head throbbing with questions I didn't know how to answer. Michael had always been the calm, organized one. He kept our records in neat folders, paid the bills on time, and remembered every birthday. Now I felt both grateful for his habits and completely lost without his guidance. One of the hardest moments was sitting down with Emma to explain as gently as I could what had happened. I knew there was no right way to break a child's heart, and nothing could prepare either of us for that conversation. I took her hand in mine, looked into her wide, trusting eyes, and told her the truth. Daddy isn't coming home, sweetheart. He got very sick, and the doctors tried their best, but sometimes people's bodies just can't heal. She didn't cry at first. She just curled up against me, small and quiet, as if trying to make herself invisible. Grief expresses itself differently in children. Sometimes it's a sudden sob in the middle of the night, or a question that comes out of nowhere weeks later. Sometimes it's just silence. Through all of this, the practicalities pressed in. I met with the funeral director alone, walking through choices I had never considered: cremation or burial flowers or donations, what song to play at the service. Each question felt impossibly heavy. I'd always pictured myself having someone by my side for these decisions, a sibling or parent to lean on. Instead, I found myself sitting across from strangers, trying to remember Michael's preferences, trying not to let my hands shake as I signed the necessary forms. The director was kind, but there's only so much a professional can do when your soul is aching for family. After the funeral arrangements, I faced a wall of legal and financial logistics that no one prepares you for. Michael had a will, thank goodness, but even so, the process was overwhelming. I needed to contact his workplace for benefits, call the bank about our joint accounts, and figure out what paperwork the life insurance company would require. I learned quickly that even the smallest detail, like whose name was listed as a beneficiary, could turn into hours of phone calls and tears. I read stories online from other widows and widowers who'd faced even worse: frozen accounts, contested wills, distant relatives surfacing with claims. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in the chaos, but also sorrow that so many people walked this difficult road without a map. One afternoon, as I struggled with a particularly confusing set of forms, I remembered something Michael's mother had told me years ago. After her own husband passed away, she said, "People will offer to help, but it's the quiet ones who show up and just do what needs to be done, who truly carry you." In those first days, help came from the most unexpected places. My neighbor brought over dinner and offered to mow the lawn. Michael's colleagues dropped off cards and care packages, and Emma's teacher sent home a note reminding me to let the school know if we needed anything. These gestures, small as they seemed, formed a patchwork of support that helped hold me together. Still, there were times I was too proud or too numb to ask for help. I tried to manage everything myself: Emma's needs, the house, the paperwork, telling myself I had to be strong, that falling apart would only make things harder. Looking back, I realized this was a mistake. In grief, strength sometimes means letting yourself lean on others, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. The world tells us to stay strong in hard times, but the truth is, nobody can weather a storm completely alone. I wish I'd known that sooner. There are practical lessons buried in this pain. One of them is to prepare for the unthinkable, even if it feels unnecessary or morbid. Michael and I had spoken vaguely about wills and life insurance, but like most couples our age, we thought we had plenty of time. The reality is, none of us knows how many tomorrows we'll get. It's never too early to organize your affairs, to have those uncomfortable conversations about what happens if the worst should occur. A friend of mine, Anna, learned this the hard way after her husband died in a car accident without a will. The legal battles with his distant cousins dragged on for months, adding another layer of suffering to her loss. By the end of that first week, I felt like I had aged a decade. I'd learned how to read legalese, negotiate with banks, and stand up for myself in ways I never had before. I'd also learned that grief is not a linear process. It's a spiral. You think you're moving forward, and then one small thing, a song on the radio, a favorite mug, pulls you back into sorrow. But with every step, I was quietly building new muscles, resilience, patience, and a kind of hope that persists, even when you don't believe it's possible. Emma was my anchor through it all. Her needs, her breakfast, her bedtime stories, her questions about what comes next kept me grounded in the present. There were moments when she would leave a drawing for Michael on his pillow or ask if we could bake his favorite cookies because maybe Daddy can smell them in heaven. Her innocence was both heartbreaking and healing. Children have a way of reminding us to keep moving, to find small joys in the midst of sorrow. By the time the funeral approached, I felt a fragile sense of accomplishment. I had managed somehow to keep our little world afloat. I had signed the papers, made the calls, found ways to answer Emma's questions with honesty and love. But I also recognized that this was just the beginning, the start of a much longer journey through grief and change. The storm had not passed. I was simply learning how to steer through it. As I dressed Emma for the service, smoothing her hair and fastening her shoes, I whispered a promise in her ear. "We're in this together, kiddo. Always." She smiled, brave and small, and squeezed my hand in return. That promise, simple, quiet, fiercely determined, would become my lifeline in the days and weeks to come. Next would come the family and all the complications their arrival would bring. I was about to discover that loss not only tests your strength, but also reveals the true shape of the relationships around you. Grief, I was learning, can either pull people closer or expose the cracks that were always there. And as we walked out the door, ready to face what came next, I knew we would face it side by side, Emma and I, navigating the storm one step at a time. The morning of Michael's funeral, our home filled with the scents of lilies and coffee, with the sound of muted footsteps and subdued voices. Emma clung to my hand as we greeted relatives, friends, and neighbors, some familiar, some distant, all wearing that blend of concern and awkwardness that grief seems to elicit. I was grateful for their presence even when it was uncomfortable, because their coming was an acknowledgement of what we'd lost. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice who arrived early and who waited until the last possible moment. It was nearly noon when my parents showed up dressed impeccably, as if arriving for a gala rather than a funeral. My mother pressed her cool cheek to mine, whispering a practiced condolence, while my father gave me a stiff pat on the shoulder and turned quickly to greet Michael's colleagues. Jessica, my sister, glided in with her husband and their two boys, the children giggling, until Jessica hushed them with a sharp glance. I watched as my mother drifted to Emma, bending down to kiss her forehead and offering her a small wrapped gift, a gesture that felt both thoughtful and out of place. During the service, I focused on Michael's memory, letting the sound of Emma's quiet breathing next to me drown out the rest. The words of the minister blurred together in a haze, my mind replaying old laughter holidays, late-night talks in the kitchen. But even in my grief, I noticed my parents' attention drifting, their whispered exchanges, the way they seemed to be taking stock not just of the moment, but of the people, the house, the details of our life. After the guests had left, my parents stayed behind. The house, now quiet except for the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen, felt different, charged, uneasy. My mother sat across from me at the dining room table, her hands folded neatly. She cleared her throat and began with a question that felt entirely out of step with the day. "Rachel, we were just wondering, did Michael leave any instructions? Any arrangements about what happens next?" At first, I thought she meant practical matters, arrangements for Emma, perhaps, or suggestions Michael might have made about our home. But her gaze lingered on the documents stacked on the sideboard, on the key I'd placed beside them. My father joined in, his voice, low but steady. "You know, Rachel, we did help with your down payment when you bought this house. It's only fair to talk about how things will be divided now. These things can get tricky in families." For a moment, I was speechless. The words sat between us like a wall. Only hours had passed since we'd said goodbye to Michael. Yet here they were talking about inheritances, about what they deserved. My chest tightened and I had to remind myself to breathe. I looked at Emma sitting quietly at the end of the table, her sketchbook in her lap, eyes wide and solemn. This wasn't the first time I'd heard stories like this. A neighbor, Maria, once confided in me after her father died suddenly. She had barely finished grieving when her siblings arrived with calculators and questions more focused on dividing assets than on supporting one another. It made the loss so much worse, Maria had said, tears in her eyes. You learn very quickly who values you for you and who only sees you as part of an equation. At the time, I'd sympathized, never imagining the same situation would unfold in my own family. I tried to answer calmly, though my heart was racing. Michael took care of everything. There are clear instructions, and everything he left is for Emma and me. My mother pursed her lips, and my father looked away, clearly dissatisfied. Jessica, who had been silent, suddenly interjected. Well, you know how family is. We just want to make sure things are handled fairly. The word fairly hung in the air, heavy with implication. But fairness, I realized, is so often just another word for what's in it for me. Their questions didn't stop. They pressed for details about life insurance, the house, Michael's retirement accounts. I found myself growing smaller with every answer, feeling as if my worth was being measured against numbers on a page. I tried to redirect to talk about Emma, about how she was handling everything, but my parents barely acknowledged her. It was as if Michael's death was an inconvenience, an obstacle to the real issue at hand. In that moment, I understood what so many others had tried to tell me. Grief exposes the true nature of relationships. When love is genuine, it makes space for sorrow, for care, for gentle presence. But when love is transactional, it shows up with questions and ledgers demanding its share before the tears have even dried. A few days later, my parents returned, this time with more determination. They came with folders, old receipts, and a new insistent tone. Rachel, we helped set you up when you were just starting out, my father began. It's only fair that we're considered now. My mother nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I realized suddenly that no matter how much I explained, they saw Michael's death not just as a loss, but as an opportunity. It's a story that plays out in families everywhere. In the U.S., disputes over estates and inheritances are among the top reasons siblings and relatives fall out. I read about a case in Michigan where a woman was sued by her own brother for the family home after their parents died, despite her being the sole caregiver for years. The emotional toll of such battles can linger for generations. Money has a way of bringing out the best and worst in people. It can unite, but more often it divides. I thought about all the times my parents had chosen celebration over grief, appearance over authenticity. Their reaction now fit that pattern perfectly. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but their love had always come with terms spoken and unspoken. I saw it clearly now, and it hurt more than I expected. There was a lesson in all of this, one I wish I'd understood sooner. Sometimes you have to protect yourself not just from strangers, but from the very people who should be your safety net. It's not a failure to set boundaries. It's not selfish to guard the legacy your loved one left behind, especially for your child's future. And sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that free you to build a healthier, more honest life. Emma sensed the tension, even if she didn't grasp all the details. That night, she curled up beside me, her voice small in the dark. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us? I held her close and whispered, No, sweetheart. They just have a different way of seeing things. But we're okay. Daddy wanted us to be okay. As I drifted off to sleep, I knew the road ahead would be rocky. There would be more questions, more pressure, maybe even threats. But I also knew I was ready to fight for Emma, for Michael's memory, and for the right to rebuild our lives on our own terms. What I didn't know yet was how this struggle would push me to seek help beyond my family, to find support in unexpected places, and learn new ways to heal. Sometimes it takes losing what you thought you needed to discover what truly sustains you. And so, with each difficult conversation, I took one more step toward a future where Emma and I could choose the people and the values that truly mattered. The evening after my parents' second visit, a hush fell over the house. Emma sat at the dining table, drawing a picture of our family, Michael, herself, and me, all holding hands under a sunlit sky. She colored quietly, but her eyes followed me as I paced between stacks of paperwork and the kitchen sink. I tried to distract myself with chores, but the air was thick with everything left unsaid. For all the questions my parents had asked, the hardest ones, the ones that really mattered, remained buried. How would we move forward? Would Emma be okay? Could I protect what Michael left behind and give our daughter the security and love she deserved? After dinner, as twilight softened the room, Emma set her pencil down and looked at me. "Mom, why did Grandma and Grandpa bring those papers? Why were they asking about Daddy's things?" Her voice was gentle but steady, braver than I felt. I realized then how much she noticed how deeply she absorbed the world, even in grief. Children see far more than adults often imagine. I sat beside her, choosing my words with care. "Sometimes when people are sad or scared, they worry about things that aren't really important," I said. "But you and I, we know what Daddy wanted for us. We know what matters most." Emma nodded, her eyes wise beyond her years. She seemed to understand that love, not money, is what shapes a family's future. Still, I could see her wrestling with the anxiety of not belonging, of losing more than she already had. I remembered a story from a friend, Angela, whose parents divorced when she was 10. Angela once told me, "The hardest part wasn't losing my dad. It was feeling like I didn't have a place anymore." I promised myself that Emma would never feel that way no matter what pressures came from outside. The next day, I received an email from Michael's lawyer. It was gentle but direct, outlining our rights and the steps needed to secure Emma's inheritance. He explained how Michael's will placed everything in a living trust with me as the sole trustee and Emma as the beneficiary. "The law is clear," he assured me. "No one else has a legal claim, not even close relatives. If there's pressure or threats, let us know. We're here to protect you." Relief flooded through me. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt a sense of certainty. But I also realized that legal protection and emotional closure are two very different things. That afternoon, as if she sensed the shift, Emma walked into the living room, holding a white envelope. "Can I give this to Grandma and Grandpa when they come back?" she asked. I looked at her, unsure. "What's inside?" She opened the flap and showed me a letter she had written in her careful looping script addressed to family. She read aloud, "Daddy loved us, and we love him. He wanted us to be happy and safe. Please let us keep the things that remind us of him, and let's be kind to each other." My throat tightened. Emma, in her innocence, was offering the one thing the adults couldn't: honesty without expectation. I hugged her close, marveling at the courage it took for a child to voice what the rest of us only dared to think. Later, when my parents arrived, Emma stood tall and handed the envelope to my mother. There was a silence that stretched across the room. My mother opened it, read, and for a fleeting moment I saw the flicker of regret in her eyes. She reached for Emma, but my daughter stepped back, her gaze unwavering. "That's why you came, right?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air, weighty and gentle at once. My father cleared his throat, but the conversation had shifted. The ledger was no longer just about assets, it was about trust. This was a turning point for all of us. My parents were forced to face the truth, not just of Michael's will, but of the legacy they were leaving as grandparents. I saw in that moment how easily adults forget the power of their example, how children learn not from what we say, but from how we act. Emma's dignity and honesty changed the tone of every conversation that followed. Even Jessica, usually quick to defend our parents, seemed moved by her niece's quiet courage. It made me think about a family I'd read about in a community group, a single mother, Mariah, whose teenage son stood up during a family dispute to say, "We can fight about the house, but what I really want is for us to talk to each other again." In the end, the grown-ups listened, and the family found a way forward. Sometimes it's the youngest voices that call us back to what matters. Sometimes children hold up a mirror and remind us who we want to be. As the days passed, I found myself drawing strength from Emma's example. She went to school, played soccer, shared stories about her dad with her friends. Her laughter came more easily. When I asked her how she felt, she said, "I miss Daddy, but I know he wanted us to be brave." "I think I can do that, Mommy." Her resilience softened my own grief, showing me that love, when protected and honored, really is enough to carry us through. The lesson in all of this was clear. The truth spoken gently is stronger than any claim or demand. By naming what mattered, Emma gave us all permission to move forward, not by erasing the past, but by honoring it. I understood finally that my role was not just to defend Michael's wishes legally, but to model for Emma how to stand firm with kindness and integrity. In a world so often focused on what we have, it's who we are and how we care for one another that defines our real legacy. With this new perspective, I began to look beyond my family for the support Emma and I needed. The experience of navigating loss and conflict had taught me that help sometimes comes from unexpected places, from people outside the circle you thought was essential. And as I took my first tentative steps into the wider world, I was about to discover a different kind of family, one built not on blood, but on shared experience, compassion, and the healing power of community. In the aftermath of the confrontation with my parents, I realized that protecting Michael's wishes and ensuring Emma's future were no longer abstract ideas, they were daily responsibilities. Grief had shifted from the initial dizzying chaos into a quieter, more determined resolve. I spent mornings over coffee reviewing the paperwork our lawyers sent, making phone calls, signing documents, and organizing folders. Each step brought its own mix of relief and exhaustion. I was building a new shield around my daughter and myself, a shield made not only of legal documents, but of clarity, intention, and love. Michael had always been the practical one in our marriage. I remembered how just a year before, he insisted we update our will after a friend of his passed away, unexpectedly leaving his family in turmoil. At the time, I brushed off the discussion. We're still young, I joked, but Michael just smiled, his patient smile, and replied, "That's exactly why we need to do this." Now I was grateful for his foresight. The living trust he set up with me as trustee and Emma as sole beneficiary gave us a clear legal foundation that could not be easily challenged. Even so, I learned quickly that paperwork only carries as much strength as the person willing to defend it. My first real lesson came from a conversation with our attorney, Mr. Ellis, a kind-eyed man who guided me through the process. He explained step by step what each document meant, what my rights were, and how to respond if anyone questioned the terms. "A will is a gift of peace," he said one afternoon, as I sat in his office, "but it can only protect you if you understand it and if you're prepared to enforce it." He described stories of families torn apart by ambiguous wording or missing signatures of siblings dragged into courtrooms because of poorly planned estates. I realized that, like so many American families, we were only one misstep away from the same fate. For those watching or listening who haven't walked this road, let me share a few things I wish I'd known sooner. First, it's never too early to organize your affairs, even if it feels uncomfortable. Talk openly with your spouse about your wishes. List your assets, insurance policies, and debts. Choose guardians for your children and backup trustees. Keep copies of everything in a safe, accessible place and let someone you trust know where to find them. If your loved one has already passed, don't be afraid to ask questions, seek professional guidance, or take your time. Rushed decisions are rarely good ones. I thought of Anna, a friend from my grief support group, who shared how her late husband's family tried to claim the house they'd lived in for years. Anna's husband, believing his parents would never turn on her, left everything in his name alone. After his death, the house went into probate, and Anna spent months fighting for the right to remain in her own home. "It's not about greed," she told me, her eyes tired but kind. "It's about security. It's about honoring what we built together." Her story reminded me that good intentions alone aren't enough. Preparation is a form of love. The process was not without its stress. My parents tried more than once to push the issue, asking about accounts, suggesting family meetings, and reminding me of old gifts and favors. But with each conversation, I felt a new confidence rising. I answered calmly, always referring back to the legal documents and Michael's clear wishes. When their questions turned to pressure, I leaned on Mr. Ellis and our written protections. Eventually, they began to back down. They understood, if not the love behind our decisions, then at least the boundaries they could not cross. Through all of this, Emma watched and learned. She saw me gather documents, meet with lawyers, and hold my ground with compassion and firmness. We talked openly and gently about what it meant to protect her dad's memory and her own future. I wanted her to know that security isn't just about money or property, but about being seen respected and safe. The legacy Michael left was more than a trust fund or a house. It was the example of doing the right thing even when it was hard. One afternoon, as we sorted papers together, Emma asked, "Mom, does this mean we'll always have our home?" I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "Yes, sweetheart, your dad made sure of that, and now I'm making sure too. This house, our memories, our family, they belong to us." The relief on her face was immediate, and I knew in that moment that all the paperwork, all the meetings, and all the boundaries set had been worth it. There's a common mistake I see in so many stories, waiting until it's too late, believing conflict won't happen because our family is different. But love, as I've learned, is best expressed not just in words or gifts, but in preparation and protection. If you take anything from my journey, let it be this: do the hard work now out of love for your family, so that one day when you're gone, what remains is not chaos, but peace. As the legal matters settled and the paperwork was finally organized, I felt the weight in my chest begin to ease. I could finally turn my focus from survival to healing, from defending what we had to nurturing what we could still become. The next step, though, I didn't yet know it would be reaching out beyond the walls of our house, finding connection support and friendship in places I'd never expected. With Michael's legacy secured and Emma's future safe, I realized it was time to rediscover what it meant to live, not just to endure. And so we began to step out into the world again tentatively at first, then with growing hope, ready to find new sources of strength and community and to create new memories together, guided by the quiet, steady love that Michael left behind. With the legal storms passing and Michael's legacy firmly protected, life began to quiet, at least on the outside. Yet inside, there was a loneliness. I couldn't name an ache that lingered in the spaces Michael used to fill. I realized as the months rolled by that grief is not a problem to be solved, but a companion to be gently carried. For a long time, I thought that once the paperwork was finished and my parents finally accepted boundaries, the hardest part would be over. But healing, as I soon learned, doesn't happen in isolation. It asks us to reach out to risk being seen and to allow others into our vulnerable moments. It was Michael's mother, Linda, who first suggested I attend a local support group. "You need to be with people who understand Rachel," she told me, her voice warm with the wisdom of someone who had already traveled this road. At first, I resisted. The idea of sitting in a circle sharing my story with strangers felt overwhelming. But one evening after Emma went to bed, I found myself searching online for community resources. I discovered a nearby group called Hearts in Transition, a gathering for widows and widowers of all ages. Their next meeting was at the town library just a few blocks away. I showed up on a chilly Thursday night, my heart thumping as I pushed open the door. Inside, I found not just sadness, but laughter, soft, genuine, and unexpectedly comforting. The room was filled with people from every walk of life: young parents, retirees, newlyweds, and those who had spent decades with their partners. We shared coffee and cookie stories and tears, but also jokes and small victories. One man, Mark, spoke about trying to learn how to cook after 40 years of never setting foot in the kitchen. "I can burn toast and boil water at the same time," he quipped, and the whole room laughed. It was the first time in months that I felt my burdens lift even for a moment. What surprised me most was how quickly strangers became allies. There was a sense of permission in the group to grieve messily, to celebrate progress, to be honest about setbacks. I met Carla, who lost her wife to cancer and who had started a community garden in her partner's memory. I met Pam, who just moved across the country after her husband's passing and was searching for any kind of anchor. We didn't compete or compare losses. Instead, we honored each other's pain and supported each other's growth. One evening, I shared my own struggles, the tension with my parents, the fear of letting Emma down, the exhaustion of being both mother and father. The group listened without judgment. Afterwards, Mark pulled me aside and said, "Sometimes it takes a village even for grown-ups. Let us be your village for a while." That kindness echoed something I'd heard from my neighbor Maria, who had emigrated from Brazil as a young woman. In my hometown, Maria told me no one grieves alone. The community brings food stories and music to help lift your spirit. Grief is lighter when it's shared. Slowly, I allowed myself to lean on these new friends. When I needed someone to watch Emma for an hour, Carla volunteered. When I was too tired to cook, Pam dropped off a casserole. I did the same for them when I could, and gradually the empty spaces in my life began to fill with laughter, conversation, and hope. Emma, too, found new companions, children, and grandchildren of group members who understood what it meant to miss a parent who knew the rules, for being gentle with each other's hearts. Online, I discovered even broader networks, forums, and Facebook groups where people across the country shared advice and comfort. There were threads on everything from legal advice to handling holidays, from helping children cope to managing loneliness at night. It struck me that although our stories were different, the thread running through all of them was resilience. Again and again, I saw proof that support doesn't always come from the places we expect. Sometimes our chosen family, friends, neighbors, even strangers show up when blood relatives cannot or will not. A lesson crystallized from these experiences: healing is both individual and communal. While I had to find my own footing, it was the gentle encouragement of others that helped me take each next step. There is no shame in reaching out, no weakness in accepting help. The myth of the strong, silent sufferer is just that, a myth. Real strength lies in vulnerability, in the courage to say, "I'm not okay," and to let others hold space for our pain. As spring approached, I began to feel lighter. The house felt less like a museum of loss and more like a home again. I started a small tradition inviting members of the group over for tea on Sunday afternoons. Sometimes we talked about our loved ones, other times we discussed movies or books or recipes. It was ordinary, but it felt extraordinary in its warmth. I watched Emma blossom too, her laughter returning, her artwork growing more colorful, her confidence rebuilding day by day. One Sunday, Emma brought home a flyer for a community art project. The local rec center was organizing a mural, and families who had lost someone were invited to contribute. "Can we do it, Mom?" she asked, eyes shining. That simple request marked a new chapter for us, one where grief was still present, but no longer the center of our lives. Instead, we were learning to honor Michael's memory through connection, creativity, and service to others. This shift from isolation to community changed everything. It reminded me that while loss is inevitable, suffering alone is not. There is always someone out there willing to listen, to share a meal, to help shoulder the load. It might not look like the family you imagined, but it can be the family you need. As we prepared to join the mural project, I realized that Emma and I were not just surviving. We were starting to thrive. The support of others gave us new strength, and I wanted to pay that forward to become, for someone else, the lifeline that had been offered to me. In the weeks to come, this would inspire a new idea, one that would allow us to transform our pain into purpose and extend our circle of care even further. And as the mural's bright colors began to fill our town, I felt hope blooming again for both Emma and myself. With each new day, the house slowly shifted from a place of loss into a home where Emma and I could breathe again. The practical burdens of legal documents and family tensions receded, and in their place grew the gentler, quieter work of rebuilding not just our routines, but our sense of who we were. It surprised me how even the smallest changes could signal a new beginning. Buying a cheerful new rug for the hallway, planting tulip bulbs in the garden, painting Emma's room, her favorite shade of blue. Each act, however small, was a statement of hope. Life would not look the same, but it could still be beautiful. Moving through grief is a slow, non-linear journey. Some mornings, the world felt open with possibility. On others, a memory or an old song would pull me back under the weight of missing Michael. I learned to make space for both the hope and the sadness without judging myself. Emma, too, processed her loss in waves. There were nights she climbed into my bed needing extra reassurance, and afternoons when she burst through the front door with stories from school, laughter bubbling over. Her resilience was both a balm and an inspiration. One practical lesson I discovered was the importance of new routines. After loss, familiar rituals can feel haunted, while new ones become anchors in uncharted waters. Emma and I started Pancake Saturdays, flipping imperfect circles in the kitchen and letting flour dust the countertops. We found a small joy in baking cookies for our neighbors, or picking wildflowers from the lot down the street. These simple habits, I realized, gave us both something to look forward to and a reason to smile even on the hard days. I also saw how rebuilding meant letting go of old expectations. There was a part of me that had believed life could only be good if it looked like before, if the family stayed intact, if the future stayed predictable. But the more I opened myself to new experiences, the more I understood that happiness could look different than I imagined. I heard a story in our support group about Tom, a widower who sold his house after his wife, past moving to a smaller apartment and starting a dog walking business. I never thought I'd be the guy with a fanny pack and a pack of dogs, he laughed, but it turns out joy finds you when you least expect it. Inspired by this, I started to consider a change of our own. Our old house, while full of memories, sometimes felt like it belonged to another chapter of our lives. One afternoon, Emma and I sat together and made a list. What did we want in our next home? More sunlight, a yard for a garden, a porch for reading on summer evenings. With a mixture of sadness and excitement, we decided to look for a smaller house on the edge of town, close to Emma's school, and to the friends we'd made through our support group. The move itself was bittersweet. Packing up Michael's old sweaters, his favorite books, the framed photo of our wedding, I felt a fresh wave of loss, but also a quiet sense of gratitude. We can bring our best memories with us, I told Emma as we taped boxes shut. The love doesn't stay in the walls, it comes with us. When we finally settled into our new place, it felt less like leaving the past behind and more like making space for the future. Emma blossomed in her new environment. She decorated her room with posters, fairy lights, and her latest artwork. She joined a local art club and spent weekends working on the mural at the rec center, surrounded by children and adults who'd all weathered storms of their own. Watching her laugh and paint with others, I realized how healing is accelerated by a sense of belonging. We both found comfort in the community we'd helped build in the gentle web of friendships that held us up on days when we felt alone. Of course, the journey wasn't without setbacks. There were moments of doubt nights when I questioned my decisions or felt guilty for finding happiness again. I worried sometimes that Emma was moving on too quickly or that I was moving on too slowly. But those were just echoes of old fears, the voices that tried to measure healing by someone else's yardstick. Each time I saw Emma reach for joy, each time I let myself laugh with friends or enjoy a quiet afternoon, I reminded myself that healing is not about erasing the past, but about living fully in the present. I thought often about the people who had supported us, our group, our neighbors, even strangers online who had reached out with words of kindness. Their generosity shaped my understanding of what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. One evening while baking with Emma, I told her how community is like sourdough starter. A little bit shared and nurtured can grow into something nourishing for many. She smiled and said, "We can be someone's starter too." That simple wisdom became a lesson I wanted to live by. Looking back, I saw how our lives had been rebuilt from the ashes of loss, not by returning to what was, but by bravely stepping into what could be. Each new friendship, each small tradition, each honest conversation was a brick in the foundation of our new life. I learned that there is no timeline for recovery, no perfect way to move forward. The only thing that truly matters is to keep choosing hope, one small act at a time. As Emma and I settled into our new home, a sense of gratitude bloomed. We had survived the storm not because we were unbreakable, but because we had learned to bend to reach out to let others in. Our story wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about transformation. And as we looked ahead, I found myself wondering how we might use what we'd learned to help others find their own path through the darkness. That question became the seed for something new, a project that would allow us to give back to share the hope and support that had carried us this far. And as the season changed outside our window, I knew our next chapter was just beginning. As Emma and I settled into the gentle rhythm of our new life, I began to notice something shifting inside me. The wounds of loss were still there, but they no longer controlled the pace of my days. Instead, I found myself drawn toward the idea of giving back, of transforming the pain we had endured into something that could help others. I remembered the meals left on our porch, the late-night phone calls from friends, the kindness of strangers who'd shared their own stories. Those acts of generosity had been lifelines for us, steadying us when the future felt uncertain. I wanted to offer that same lifeline to others who might be facing the storm alone. One evening, as Emma and I walked home from the mural project, she squeezed my hand and asked, "Do you think we could help other families like ours, Mom? Maybe there are kids who feel left out or who lost someone too." Her words stuck with me. I knew she wasn't just talking about charity. She was talking about belonging, about making space in the world for every child who felt unseen or unsupported. That night, after Emma went to bed, I sat at our kitchen table with a notebook sketching out ideas. What did we have to offer? A story of hope, a listening ear, maybe even practical help for families in transition. I decided to start small. The next week, I reached out to our local community center, sharing our story with the director, Mrs. Alvarez, who had lost her own brother years before. She listened, nodding in understanding, and suggested we begin with an art workshop for children who'd lost a loved one. The workshop, called Brighter Days, would give kids a safe place to express their feelings and create something beautiful out of their pain. Emma loved the idea and helped design the flyer, her name proudly listed as the first junior volunteer. We hung flyers at the library, the grocery store, and in Emma's school office. The first session was small, just 5 children, shy and uncertain, accompanied by parents who looked as exhausted as I remembered feeling. We painted and drew, sometimes quietly, sometimes chatting about pets, memories, and favorite places. I watched as the children gradually opened up, sharing their stories in ways words alone could never capture. One little boy drew his father as a superhero with wings. A girl painted a garden with her grandma smiling under a bright sun. Emma, gentle and empathetic, comforted a new friend who cried halfway through, offering a hug and a joke about the messiness of glitter. By the end of the afternoon, the room was filled with laughter and color, a reminder that healing, like art, is often messy and unpredictable, but always worthwhile. After the first workshop, the parents lingered, talking quietly in the corner of the room. Some exchanged numbers, grateful for a new connection. Mrs. Alvarez smiled and whispered, "This is exactly what our town needed." Encouraged, I decided to make the workshop a monthly tradition, expanding it with donations of art supplies from local businesses and volunteers from our support group. Each month, new families joined, and with each gathering, the sense of community deepened. Emma's role blossomed too. She became a mentor for the younger children, organizing games, helping set up snacks, and cheering on every artistic effort. I watched with pride as she stood before the group during our third session, holding up her own painting of Michael and sharing a story about Dad's pancake breakfasts. Her courage and kindness inspired others to speak about their own loved ones, sparking conversations that brought comfort and understanding. The workshop was just the beginning. As word spread, I was approached by a guidance counselor at Emma's school who wanted to partner on a scholarship fund for students dealing with loss or hardship. The idea was simple: offer a small grant for books, art supplies, or therapy sessions so that no child facing adversity would have to go without. We named it the Michael Bennett Scholarship, in honor of the love and care Michael had always shown his students and our own family. I reached out to local businesses for support, sharing our story in the town newsletter. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, not just from those who knew us, but from strangers touched by our journey. At the first scholarship award ceremony, Emma stood beside me, beaming as we handed out certificates. The recipients were children from all walks of life: a girl whose mom worked 3 jobs to keep her in school, a boy who had survived cancer, a pair of siblings whose father had died in the military. Each of their stories added to the tapestry of resilience that wove our community together. After the ceremony, Emma tugged at my sleeve and said Dad would be really happy. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes, and hugged her tightly. In that moment, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. Turning pain into purpose doesn't erase the past. It doesn't mean forgetting or moving on in the way some might expect. Instead, it's about honoring what was lost by creating space for hope. It's about finding meaning in the hardest moments and offering others the light you found in your darkest nights. I realized that our healing had come full circle, not because life was easy or perfect, but because we'd found a way to help others find their own path through the dark. The lesson was simple, but profound: generosity and purpose are the keys to transformation. When we use our struggles to reach out, to connect, to serve, we turn sorrow into a source of strength, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we touch. Our little art program and scholarship fund might not change the world, but for the children and families it reached, it was a sign that no one had to be alone in their grief. As the year drew to a close and the mural project wrapped up, Emma and I stood before the finished wall, a riot of color and memory. She slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Look at what we built, Mom." I smiled, awash in gratitude, and realized that Michael's legacy was living on in every brushstroke, every smile, every act of kindness that had sprung from our shared journey. Yet even as the seasons changed and our purpose expanded, I sensed that our story was still unfolding. The work of healing and giving back never truly ends. It simply grows, reaching new people, new hearts, new dreams. As Emma's voice rose with laughter on the playground and the sun set gently over our town, I felt ready for whatever came next. Our pain had become our purpose, and in sharing it, we had found our way home. The year that followed our new beginning unfolded quietly, marked not by grand gestures, but by dozens of small, gentle moments. Emma's laughter returned in full, ringing through our home and spilling onto the porch as she painted, baked, and invited friends over after school. I saw her confidence bloom, her empathy for others deepening in ways I hoped Michael would have loved. There was a peace in our daily life I hadn't thought possible during those long, difficult months after his death. As seasons changed, so too did my relationship with the past. My parents visited occasionally, more reserved than before, as if tiptoeing around old wounds. At first, our interactions were strained and polite, shaped by the unspoken understanding that some things could not be undone. But Emma, always so open-hearted, greeted them with warmth. She didn't carry the old resentments I sometimes found myself clutching. I realized then that forgiveness is not a single act, but a series of choices, a letting go again and again each time pain resurfaces. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending we hadn't been hurt. It meant acknowledging the truth and choosing not to let it define our future. I remembered a story from our support group, a woman named Denise whose brother sued her over their parents' estate. Years later, Denise explained, "I stopped waiting for him to say, 'Sorry.' I forgave him so I could be free to live." Her courage stayed with me as I worked through my own process. I began to see my parents with more compassion, understanding how fear and regret sometimes mask themselves as pride or stubbornness. Emma's achievements brought our family together in new, less fraught ways. When she won a community art award for her mural work, we gathered at the town hall. My mother brought flowers, my father snapped photos, and for a brief moment we shared in genuine joy. There was an ease in these gatherings that had never existed before, as if we'd all agreed without saying, so that love mattered more than old disputes. Watching Emma thank the crowd poised and articulate, I felt the fullness of everything we'd rebuilt. The lesson I learned was this: healing does not mean returning to what was, but moving forward with what is possible. Family, I discovered, is a living thing. It grows and changes, sometimes surprising us with its resilience. Sometimes it requires distance and boundaries. Other times it invites reconciliation, even if only in small imperfect steps. The heart finds its own way given time and patience. With our art workshop and scholarship fund thriving, I started mentoring new members of our support group, sharing the lessons Emma and I had learned about grief boundaries and hope. A young widow named Tasha, who reminded me of myself a year ago, asked, "Does it ever get better, really?" I smiled gently and said, "It gets different. You grow stronger, you find new reasons to smile, and sometimes you find unexpected grace." Tasha's eyes filled with tears, and I saw that she understood hope isn't about erasing the darkness, but about letting a little more light in each day. Emma and I kept adding small traditions to our life: Friday movie nights, volunteering at the animal shelter, planting wildflowers in the park each spring. These habits rooted us in the present and gave us things to look forward to while honoring Michael's memory with laughter and action. On the anniversary of his passing, we gathered with our support group and families from the workshop, holding a candlelit walk in the town square. We shared stories and hugs, and as the lanterns floated upward, I felt a quiet pride in how far we'd come. I learned to trust in second chances, in the ordinary miracle of waking up each day and choosing kindness even when it wasn't easy. Emma's forgiveness and openness reminded me that moving forward is a gift we give ourselves, a decision to keep loving, risking, and growing no matter what we've lost. The final lesson for me was that we carry our loved ones with us, not in sorrow, but in the way we love others, in the causes we support, and in the joy we allow ourselves to feel again. As spring returned, painting the world in fresh colors, Emma and I stood by the mural she'd helped create. Children played nearby, parents chatted over coffee, and the sun warmed our faces. Emma squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did it, Mom. We're okay." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle in my heart. The story of our family, marked by loss but defined by courage and connection, wasn't just about survival, but about transformation. And as we walked home together, I knew that whatever came next, we would greet it with open hearts, shaped not by what we had lost, but by all we had found along the way. If this story touched your heart, or if you're walking your own journey through loss and healing, I hope you know you're not alone. Please share your experiences or words of encouragement in the comments below. Your story might be the light someone else needs tonight. If you found hope or comfort here, consider subscribing for more stories about resilience, family, and finding joy again after heartbreak. And if you know someone who could use a little extra support, feel free to share this video with them. You never know whose life you might touch. Remember, healing takes time and every small step matters. Keep reaching out, keep building community, and never be afraid to let hope back in. We're in this together. Thank you for being part of our journey. Take gentle care of yourself and those you love.